Hey everyone, and a very gentle welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about something we all use every day, a piece of modern magic we completely take for granted, the toilet. But we're going back to a time when privacy was optional, plumbing was a fantasy, and a simple trip to the necessary was, well, an adventure. We're talking about the 17th century. If you think navigating a crowded public restroom today is a challenge, imagine trying to do so while also dodging hazards from above and following a strict set of social rules. It's enough to make you deeply, deeply grateful for that simple, porcelain marvel in your own home. Before we delicately peek into the privies of the past, if you find these quiet historical explorations a nice way to unwind, perhaps you could give that like button a little press, or consider subscribing so we can continue our journeys. I always love seeing where you're listening from, so feel free to say hello in the comments below. I hope you've dimmed the lights, you're warm and comfortable, and ready for a story. Okay, let's close our eyes and step carefully into the streets of the 17th century. To understand the toilet situation in the 17th century, one first has to understand the 17th century city. Whether it was the bustling, sprawling metropolis of London or the fashionable, crowded heart of Paris, these were cities operating without the vast, invisible network of infrastructure that keeps our modern urban lives clean and orderly. There were no city-wide underground sewage systems, no water treatment plants. Waste, in all its many forms, was not whisked away to some unseen location. It was an ever-present, unavoidable, and profoundly aromatic feature of daily life. The streets were the primary receptacles for everything from horse manure and slaughterhouse refuse to household garbage and, yes, human waste. This reality shaped the very experience of being in a city, and it is the backdrop against which the story of the 17th century toilet unfolds. For the vast majority of the population, from the modest shopkeeper to the poorest laborer, the toilet was not a room but an object, the chamber pot. This humble vessel was the cornerstone of domestic sanitation. Made of earthenware, pewter, or sometimes finer ceramics for those who could afford it, the chamber pot lived in the bedroom, often tucked under the bed or in a small cabinet. It was convenient, it was private in the sense that it was within your own home, but it created a fundamental problem. Once used, its contents had to go somewhere. And in a multi-story tenement building in a crowded city, somewhere was usually the street below. This led to one of the most infamous sounds and hazards of urban life, the cry of "Gare-de-la!" Shouted from an upper-story window. The term is believed to be a corruption of the French phrase gare à l'eau, meaning, "Watch out for the water!" This was the customary, if not always heeded, warning before the contents of the chamber pot were unceremoniously tossed out into the lane. Pedestrians who were not quick or lucky enough would be unpleasantly doused. This wasn't just an occasional nuisance, it was a daily, accepted reality of city life, mentioned in diaries, letters, and contemporary literature. For women, especially those of higher social standing, a more elegant version of the chamber pot existed, known as a bourdelot. This was a gravy boat-shaped receptacle, often beautifully decorated, which could be used more discreetly by a lady, either by holding it herself or with the help of a maid, without having to lift her voluminous skirts. But regardless of its shape or elegance, the bourdelot faced the same disposal issue as its more common, circular cousin. The streets, therefore, were in a constant state of filth. Most had a central channel or gutter, known as a canal, which was intended to carry away rainwater and waste. But these were often poorly maintained, frequently clogging and creating stagnant, foul-smelling pools of mud and effluent. This miasma was the scent of the city. It was a complex bouquet, to be sure, the smell of filth mixed with wood smoke from countless chimneys, the aroma of bread from bakeries, the stench from tanneries, and the smells of the people themselves in an age of less frequent bathing. Of course, not all waste was simply thrown into the street. Some houses, especially those of the slightly more well-to-do, might have a privy or house of office. This was essentially an outhouse, a small shed in a backyard or courtyard built over a hole in the ground or a brick-lined cesspit. This was an improvement, as it contained the waste in one place, but it created a new problem. The cesspit would eventually fill up. Cleaning it was the job of men known as night soil men. or in England, gong farmers. This was one of the most unpleasant and dangerous jobs imaginable. Because the smell was so overpowering, they were legally required to work only at night. Under the cover of darkness, they would shovel the accumulated waste from the cesspits into carts and haul it out of the city, where it might be sold as fertilizer. It was a vital public service, performed by men at the very bottom of the social ladder, whose work, though essential, made them social outcasts. Now let's leave the general overview and place you directly in this world. Imagine you are walking down a street in, let's say, 17th century Paris, on your way to deliver a message for your master. It's mid-morning, and the street is a chaotic river of humanity. The first thing you have to do is learn how to walk. You don't stroll casually down the middle of the street. You learn to walk close to the walls of the buildings, keeping your head tilted slightly upwards, your ears pricked for that dreaded cry of Garde-la! The center of the street is where the canal runs, a slow-moving stream of dark, unpleasant liquid, and it's also the most exposed position for falling hazards from above. The ground beneath your feet is not a smooth pavement. It's a treacherous landscape of uneven cobblestones, mud, and muck, slick with things you'd rather not identify. You pick your way carefully, your eyes constantly scanning the ground ahead. Then there is the smell. It hits you not as a single, uniform stench, but as a series of waves, a complex and ever-changing assault on your senses. As you pass a cookshop, the rich smell of roasting meat momentarily overpowers everything else. A few steps further, and that is replaced by the sharp, acrid smell of a dyer's workshop, followed by the warm, malty aroma from a tavern. But underlying it all, a constant bass note, is the smell of waste, the sharp tang of urine, the deeper odor of manure from the horses pulling carts, and the general, damp smell of decay. You learn, as everyone does, to breathe shallowly, to tune it out as much as possible. It is simply the smell of life, the smell of the city. You might see a wealthy lady pass by, holding a perfumed pomander to her nose, a small, futile gesture against the overwhelming olfactory environment. The sounds of the street are just as intense. The iron-rimmed wheels of a heavy cart clatter deafeningly on the cobblestones. Street vendors, selling everything from hot pies to fresh oysters, shout their wares in loud, competing cries. A dog barks incessantly. Two men are having a loud argument outside a tavern. And through it all, you maintain your vigilance, listening. You hear a window scrape open above you and to your left. You instinctively flinch and quicken your pace, pressing yourself against the wall, just as a bucket full of slop hits the street a few feet behind you with a wet splash. You mutter a quiet word of thanks for your quick reflexes. A man just behind you is not so lucky, and you hear him cursing loudly. You don't look back, you just keep moving. You see children playing in the street, seemingly oblivious to the filth, their games weaving in and out of the legs of pedestrians and around the piles of refuse. You see pigs, employed as unofficial garbage disposals, rooting through a pile of vegetable scraps. Life churns on, relentlessly, in the midst of this sanitation nightmare. It's not that people didn't value cleanliness. They did, in their own persons and homes, as much as their circumstances allowed. But the concept of large-scale, civic sanitation was still in its infancy. The street was seen as a separate, untamable space. And so, your short walk across town is not just a journey from A to B, it's a test of your agility, your awareness, and the strength of your stomach. When you finally arrive at your destination, stepping across the threshold into the relative quiet and controlled environment of a private house, the sense of relief is palpable. You have successfully navigated the urban obstacle course. You have survived the daily nightmare of the 17th century street. As one moved up the social ladder in the 17th century, the chamber pot did not necessarily disappear, but the options for its use and disposal became more varied. A Midland-class merchant or a country gentleman might have a dedicated privy or house of office. This was typically a small, separate outbuilding in the garden or courtyard, essentially a shed with a wooden bench containing one or more holes, positioned over a dug cesspit. While it removed the immediate problem from the house, it was still a cold, drafty, and often spider-infested place to visit, especially in the dead of night or the depths of winter. In older castles and manor houses, a more integrated solution existed: the garderobe. This was a small room or closet built into the thickness of the stone walls, with a chute that led directly down the outside of the wall, emptying into the moat below or a cesspit at the base of the castle. The name garderobe literally means robe guard or wardrobe, and it's a popular, though likely not entirely accurate, theory that nobles would hang their clothes in these shafts, believing the ammonia fumes from the waste would kill fleas and moths. While a clever idea, the primary function was undoubtedly sanitation. A garderobe offered the convenience of being inside the main building, but it was often cold, smelly, and could make the surrounding area of the castle rather unpleasant, especially on a warm day. For the truly wealthy and the aristocracy, however, the height of sanitary luxury and status was an indoor solution: the closed stool. In French, it was the chaise percée or pier's chair. This was a piece of furniture, often beautifully crafted and ornate, that looked like a regular chair but had a lid that lifted to reveal a seat with a hole, under which a chamber pot or pewter pan was placed. The entire apparatus was designed to be close at hand, kept in the bedchamber or dressing room, saving its owner a trip to a cold privy. The chair itself could be a work of art, upholstered in velvet or brocade, with carved wooden arms and legs, designed to blend in with the other fine furniture in the room. Owning a closed stool was a clear symbol of wealth and status. It meant you could afford not only the expensive piece of furniture itself but also the domestic staff required to manage it. Because the fundamental problem, of course, remained: the pot still had to be emptied. This proximity to the monarch's most private moments made the position of the groom of the stool in the English court one of the most powerful and coveted appointments for a nobleman. The groom was not a menial servant, he was a trusted courtier, a friend, who had the king's ear at times when no one else did. He was responsible for the king's personal comfort, and this intimate access translated into immense political influence. This blending of the scatological and the political reached its zenith at the court of King Louis XIV of France, at the Palace of Versailles. The king's daily routines, known as the lever, waking, and the coucher, going to bed, were not private affairs. They were highly ritualized public ceremonies, attended by a select group of the highest-ranking nobles. And part of this ceremony often involved the king using his closed stool in front of this privileged audience. The right to be present for this moment, or even the honor of passing the king his shirt, was a jealously guarded privilege, a clear indicator of one's standing at court. It's a concept of privacy so alien to our modern minds as to be almost incomprehensible, but it illustrates perfectly how, in the 17th century, even the most basic bodily functions could be wrapped up in complex layers of etiquette, status, and power. Now, imagine you are not a king, but a servant in a slightly less grand, but still very wealthy, nobleman's household in Paris. Your name is Jean, and you are your master's valet. You are responsible for his clothes, his wigs, and his general appearance. But your most important, and least spoken of, duty revolves around his magnificent, velvet-upholstered closed stool. Your day starts before your master, the Marquis, awakens. You enter his bedchamber silently, the air still and heavy with the scent of stale perfume and sleep. Your first task is to ensure the closed stool is ready. You check that the pewter pan beneath the seat is clean, polished, and lined with a little dried moss or fragrant herbs to help absorb odors. You ensure a supply of clean linen cloths is laid out beside it. When the Marquis finally stirs and decides to rise, you must be present. He might sit on his closed stool, which is brought to his bedside, and conduct his morning's business, both bodily and administrative. It is a moment of profound and awkward intimacy. You are expected to be both invisible and available. You must avert your gaze, maintaining a respectful and impassive expression, yet be ready to respond instantly if he asks for a drink, a piece of paper, or decides to dictate a letter to you. He might discuss his plans for the day or complain about a political rival, all while attending to his needs. You learn to listen with half your mind, while the other half is focused on the sounds and, inevitably, the smells, trying not to betray any hint of discomfort. This is a position of immense trust. To be present in these moments means you are privy to your master's most unguarded state. But it is an intimacy born of servitude, a constant reminder of your station. Once the Marquis has finished, and has moved on to the more pleasant business of being dressed and powdered, your real work begins. Your next task is the slops. With practiced care, you lift the lid of the closed stool and carefully remove the pewter pan. This must be done with minimal noise and fuss. You hold it steady, trying not to spill any of its contents. Then begins the long, careful journey. You cannot simply walk through the grand corridors of the house with this object. You must take the servant's route. You exit the bedchamber, walk down the main hall for a few feet, and then slip through a discreet, almost hidden door that leads to the narrow, winding back stairs. These stairs are steep and poorly lit. You navigate them carefully, one hand on the wall, the other holding the heavy pan, praying you don't trip. You emerge in the cavernous, bustling kitchens, where the other servants are busy preparing breakfast. They studiously ignore you and your cargo. Everyone understands the nature of this task. It is a normal part of the household's routine, yet no one acknowledges it. It is a moment of silent, shared understanding. You carry the pan out the back door, across a small courtyard, to the household's main cesspit, which is located in a far corner of the garden. You lift the heavy wooden lid, and the concentrated odor that rises is far more powerful than anything you experienced in the master's chamber. You quickly empty the contents of the pan into the dark abyss, replace the lid, and retreat, taking a deep breath of comparatively fresh air. But your job is not done. You then have to take the pan to the scullery, where you scrub it clean with sand, water, and harsh soap. You then dry it, polish it until it shines, and perhaps place a fresh sachet of dried lavender inside it before starting the long journey back up the winding servants' stairs to the master's chambers. The chair itself must also be wiped down and aired. This entire ritual will be repeated several times throughout the day. It is a constant, exhausting cycle of intimate proximity and foul, menial labor. At the end of the day, your back aches from the stairs, and the faint, unpleasant smell seems to cling to your clothes and hair, no matter how much you wash. You are a trusted servant, a valet, but you are also, in the quiet reality of your daily tasks, your master's personal gong farmer. It is a strange, tiring, and uniquely 17th century nightmare. One of the most striking aspects of 17th century life, from our modern vantage point, is the different understanding of privacy. The idea of a small, separate, lockable room dedicated to the solitary performance of bodily functions was a luxury available to almost no one, and a desire held by few. Bodily functions, while not necessarily paraded, were seen as a natural part of life, and were often accommodated in ways that were semi-public or even communal. We saw this in the extreme with the king's public lever, but this attitude trickled down through society. This was not because people were crude or without a sense of decorum, but because the very architecture of their homes and castles, and the structure of their social lives, were built around shared spaces. Homes were filled with family, servants, and apprentices. True solitude was rare and for many, probably undesirable. This acceptance of shared space extended to the privy. Archaeological evidence from castles and large manor houses, as well as monastic buildings, often reveals garderobes or privy chambers with multiple seats set side by side. These were, quite literally, social toilets. One can imagine 2 or 3 individuals sitting together, unshielded from one another, attending to their needs while continuing a conversation. It sounds utterly bizarre to us, but it likely felt quite normal to them. The privy could be a place to exchange gossip, discuss business, or simply pass the time with a companion. The diarist Samuel Pepys, writing in London in the 1660s, makes several matter-of-fact references to using public privies, or houses of office, and sometimes meeting acquaintances there. There was less of the deep-seated embarrassment, or the desperate need for privacy that characterizes our modern bathroom etiquette. The priority was function and, to some extent, convenience, not solitude. This communal aspect meant that the rules were more about polite interaction in a shared space rather than the strict maintenance of individual privacy. Then there is the delicate but unavoidable question of what was used for personal hygiene after using the privy or chamber pot. Toilet paper, as we know it, was a 19th century invention and would have been an unimaginable luxury. People used what was available, and this varied greatly by social class. For the vast majority of the rural and urban poor, the materials were whatever nature or daily life provided for free. This could include handfuls of moss, hay, or straw, large soft leaves, cabbage or mullein leaves were sometimes mentioned, or even just a hand and a nearby bucket of water. In coastal areas, discarded shells might have been used. It was a make-do situation, focused on basic function rather than comfort. For the wealthy, softer and more refined options were available. Scraps of old linen or wool cloth, known as rags, would have been a common choice. These could be washed and reused, a concept that seems unhygienic to us but was perfectly logical at the time. Another option, a holdover from Roman times, was a sponge attached to a stick, which would be kept in a pot of salt water or vinegar. Paper was an expensive commodity, generally reserved for writing and printing. However, for the literate elite, discarded paper, old letters, newspapers, or pages from cheap almanacs, could also be repurposed for this final, humble use. The choice of material, like the ownership of a close stool, was another small indicator of one's place in the world. Amidst this landscape of chamber pots and communal privies, there were glimmers of innovation. Remarkably, a design for a flushing toilet was invented at the very end of the 16th century by Sir John Harington, a godson of Queen Elizabeth I. He designed a device he called the Ajax, a pun on Ajax, a slang term for a toilet, and even installed one for the Queen at Richmond Palace. His design included a raised cistern with a handle that, when turned, would release a torrent of water to wash the contents of the bowl down into a cesspit below. He wrote a book about his invention, filled with witty, slightly risque commentary on sanitation. However, the Ajax remained a novelty. It failed to catch on for several key reasons. It was complex and expensive to build. It required a ready supply of running water to the cistern, something most houses, even palaces, did not have. And most importantly, it wasn't connected to a sewer system. It still flushed into a cesspit, which still needed to be emptied by the long-suffering gong farmers. Without the accompanying infrastructure, the flushing toilet was a clever solution to only half the problem. It would take another 2.5 centuries for the idea to be perfected and widely adopted. Now let's place you within this world of complex toilet etiquette. Imagine you are a moderately successful wool merchant, and you and your wife have been invited to a grand dinner party at the city home of a powerful nobleman. It's a great honor, a chance to make connections. The house is magnificent, ablaze with candlelight, the air filled with music and the scent of expensive perfumes and roasted meats. You navigate the crowded rooms, your fine new clothes feeling a little stiff, trying to make polite conversation and not spill wine on your host's beautiful carpets. The meal is a lavish, multi-course affair, and you, wanting to show your appreciation, eat and drink heartily. An hour or so later, you feel a familiar, urgent need. And now you face a classic 17th century social dilemma. How do you excuse yourself? You can't simply announce your intentions. That would be a shocking breach of decorum. The toilet is not a topic for polite conversation. You glance around the room, but there are no helpful signs. You must find a way to leave the room without drawing attention to yourself or your purpose. You wait for a lull in the conversation, then lean over to your wife and murmur something about needing a breath of fresh air. It's a weak excuse, but it will have to do. Your real challenge is finding the facilities. In a house this large and unfamiliar, you have no idea where to look. Asking your host is out of the question. Your only option is to find a servant and ask them, and even that requires a certain delicacy. You spot a footman standing discreetly by a doorway. You catch his eye and approach him, trying to look casual. You lean in and ask quietly, "My good man, might you direct me to a place of ease?" This is one of the accepted euphemisms. The servant, trained for this very question, gives a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, sir. If you would follow me." He leads you away from the bright, noisy reception rooms, down a long, cool, and dimly lit corridor. The stone walls feel cold, and the festive sounds of the party fade behind you. He stops before a heavy wooden door. "In here, sir," he says, and then retreats, leaving you to your fate. You push the door open. The room is small, cold, and lit by a single, flickering candle that casts long, dancing shadows. You are in a well-appointed privy. There is a carved wooden bench against the far wall, but to your mild horror, you see that it contains not one, but two holes. And one of them is already occupied. An older gentleman, someone you vaguely recognize from the party, is sitting there, his breeches around his ankles. He looks up as you enter and gives you a polite, formal nod, as if you had just bumped into him in the garden. "Good evening," he says, his voice calm. Your mind races. What is the rule here? Do you turn and leave? Do you wait? Or are you expected to join him? Seeing no other option and feeling a sense of urgency, you return his nod. "Good evening," you reply, your own voice sounding a little strained. You walk over to the empty seat, trying to move with a dignity you do not feel. The situation is profoundly awkward, yet your companion seems utterly unfazed. He might even try to start a conversation. "The Duke's speech was a trifle long, did you not think?" he might ask. You murmur a non-committal agreement, your focus entirely on finishing your business as quickly and as quietly as humanly possible. You notice a small basket on the floor containing neatly folded squares of what looks like soft linen, a sign of your host's wealth and consideration. When you are finished, you stand up, adjust your clothing, and give the gentleman another slight nod. He is still seated, in no apparent hurry. You exit the chamber, closing the door softly behind you, and take a deep breath of the cool corridor air. You have survived. You make your way back to the party, your face a mask of polite indifference, hoping that the brief, strange intimacy of the twin-seated privy will remain a secret between you, the other gentleman, and the flickering candle that witnessed it all. The direct connection between filth and disease, which is a cornerstone of our modern understanding of public health, was not clearly understood in the 17th century. The germ theory of disease would not be developed and accepted for another 200 years. Yet, the consequences of poor sanitation were brutally felt every day. The constant presence of human and animal waste in the streets, and the practice of allowing cesspits to leak into the surrounding ground meant that water sources were frequently and severely contaminated. Wells, from which entire neighborhoods drew their drinking water, could be tainted by seepage from nearby privies. Rivers, like the Thames in London or the Seine in Paris, served as both a source of water and as open sewers, a repository for every kind of filth the city produced. This created a perfect breeding ground for waterborne diseases. Outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid fever, and cholera were recurrent and deadly scourges of urban life, often sweeping through crowded, impoverished districts with terrifying speed. People would fall ill and die without understanding that the very water they were drinking was the source of the poison. What people did believe in was the miasma theory. This was the prevailing medical idea that diseases were spread by bad air, or miasmas, foul, noxious smells rising from decaying organic matter, swamps, and filth. From their perspective, this made a certain amount of sense. Areas that smelled bad, like slums or marshlands, were indeed often areas where disease was rampant. They correctly observed the correlation between bad smells and sickness, but they mistook it for causation. They believed that by breathing in the foul vapor, one could become ill. This theory led to various attempts to combat disease by combating smells. People would carry pomanders, small metal balls filled with fragrant substances like ambergris, musk, or cloves, which they would hold to their noses when passing through a particularly smelly area. They would burn incense, juniper, or rosemary in their homes to purify the air. During plagues, doctors wore their famous beak-like masks, which were stuffed with aromatic herbs to protect them from the miasma of death. While these practices did little to stop the spread of actual germs, they were a logical response based on the best scientific understanding of the time. The great irony is that their fear of bad air was not entirely wrong, it was just incomplete. They were standing at the scene of the crime, correctly identifying the smell, but failing to see the invisible microbial culprit. This constant battle against filth was a monumental undertaking. The sheer volume of waste produced by a city like London was staggering, and its removal was a constant, laborious process. The cesspits under private houses and public privies had to be emptied periodically. As we've noted, this was the job of the night soil men, a task so foul it could only be done under the cover of darkness. Imagine the labor involved, manually shoveling tons of raw sewage out of a deep, dark pit into a cart, the stench so overpowering it was said to cling to the workers for days. This waste, or night soil, was then carted out of the city. It had value as an agricultural fertilizer, so it represented one of the earliest, if unintentional, forms of large-scale recycling. But the process was grim and never-ending. The scale of the problem always outpaced the solutions, leaving the city in a perpetual state of partial cleanliness and pervasive odor. It was a system stretched to its absolute limit, a constant, exhausting struggle to keep the city from drowning in its own refuse. Now let's step into this world one last time. You are not a nobleman, nor his servant. You are simply an ordinary person, perhaps a seamstress or a clerk, living your life in the 17th century city. This world of smells and hazards is not a historical curiosity to you. It is your daily reality. You do not think of it as a nightmare. It is simply the way things are. You have known nothing else. Your body and mind have adapted in ways you don't even consciously recognize. As you walk to the market, your feet automatically know to avoid the loose cobblestone near the fishmonger's stall, where a foul puddle always seems to gather. Your ears are so attuned to the sounds of the street that you react to the distant cry of "Gare-de-là!" with an instinctive sidestep, a reflex as natural as blinking. You have developed a kind of sensory resilience. The complex tapestry of urban smells, which would overwhelm a modern visitor, is to you just the normal scent of home. You can differentiate between the harmless smell of wood smoke and the more alarming smell of a rag-and-bone man's cart. You barely notice the general, underlying odor of damp and decay. It is the background noise against which your life is lived. Of course, that doesn't mean you enjoy it. There are moments, perhaps on a hot, humid day in August when the smells seem to intensify and hang heavy in the air, that you might find yourself longing for the clean, green scent of the countryside. You might remember a childhood visit to a cousin's farm, the simple pleasure of breathing air that didn't taste of smoke and humanity. The longing is a fleeting, gentle ache, a quiet acknowledgement that this urban life comes at a cost. You live with a low-level awareness of the fragility of life. You have seen neighbors, even family members, taken by sudden fevers and fluxes. The local priest and the barber surgeon talk of bad humors and foul airs. You do your best to keep your own small dwelling clean, to sweep your patch of the street, to pray for health. You accept the world as it is given to you, a place of vibrant life and ever-present filth, of beautiful church spires and foul-smelling kennels. Your life is a constant, quiet negotiation with an environment that is, by our standards, profoundly unsanitary. Yet you endure. You find joy. You love your family, you work your trade, you gossip with your neighbors. You live. Your resilience is a testament to the human ability to adapt, to find normalcy, and even happiness in conditions we would find unbearable. And now, as the sun sets on this 17th century city, a kind of magic happens. The fading light works a great deception. As dusk settles, and then gives way to a deep, moonlit darkness, the city is transformed. The darkness is a blanket, a merciful cloak that hides the filth on the streets. The mud and muck are no longer visible, absorbed into the general blackness. The overflowing gutters become invisible rivers of shadow. The harsh realities of the day are softened, blurred, and erased from sight. The sounds of the city die down. The clatter of carts and the cries of vendors are replaced by the distant call of the night watch and the sigh of the wind. Even the smells seem to change in the cool night air. They are still there, of course, but they are less sharp, less aggressive, mellowed by the dampness and the absence of the sun's heat. The night, in its own way, cleans the city, offering a temporary illusion of peace and order. In your small home, you bar the door. You are shut in for the night, safe from the hazards of the street. The world outside, with all its grime and chaos, recedes. Your world shrinks to the warm, flickering glow of a single candle, or the embers in the hearth. Here, in the quiet intimacy of your family, the struggles of the day fall away. Here, there is only the universal, human need for rest, for sleep, for the quiet restoration of the body and spirit. Let the memory of that noisy, smelly, vibrant city gently fade. Let the peace of the night, which has fallen on that world just as it has on yours, settle over you. Feel the comfort of your own clean, quiet, comfortable bed. Feel the gratitude for the simple, invisible magic of modern plumbing, for fresh air and clean water. The struggles of that distant past are over. The daily nightmare has been tucked away by the night. There is nothing left to do now but to embrace the quiet, to let go, and to drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night.